Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1981 film, The Great Muppet Caper. Now, this is the second film in the Muppet film franchise, and for a fair amount of fans of the Muppets, this is actually their favorite film in the series. I'm not one of them. I would say that I like this film, but I don't love it. And it really just comes down to the fact that I just don't think it was that well written and that well executed of a film as a whole. I think it was just a little off in terms of the writing or the comedy or the musical numbers. Like, it was one of those films where I felt like the Muppets were, for the most part, pretty good, but it felt like the plot and the setting and the scenario that they were in wasn't really on the same level as the performance that the Muppets were putting out when it comes to the Great Muppet Caper. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on the film, though, I would like to give a special shout out to Jonathan for requesting yet another review. Now, The Great Muppet Caper is directed by Jim Henson, and this was actually his first film as a director. As you all know, he would go on to direct some other movies after this, but this was actually his only Muppet film that he would wind up directing. And originally, he was going to direct the Muppet movie, but then he was convinced to do otherwise. But when the opportunity came for Jim to take the reins and take the helm for the Great Muppet Caper, he jumped at the opportunity. And the fact that Jim has so much experience working with the Muppets and working with the crew really did pay off in a pretty big way with this film. A big part of why I still like the film, despite having issues with it, is due to things like Jim Henson's direction. I think he did a wonderful job. And this is a film that features more ambitious stuff involving the Muppets, with them being outside, with them being involved in a lot of stunt work or pretty elaborate set pieces. Like the opening sequence that takes place with the Muppets in a hot air balloon during the opening credits, or what happens after that during the It's a Movie musical number, where it's just pure chaos, and there's a bunch of Muppet pratfalls, and there's practical effects, and stunts, and crashes, and all this other stuff. And I think Jim shot those scenes in a way that was actually quite impressive. And I think whenever there was a stunt, whenever the Muppets were involved in something that was larger than life, or bigger than the scope of television, I definitely feel Jim handled that well. I think he handled the framing of the film pretty well, too, for the most part. And I think that he did a good job with an occasional pan, zoom, tracking shot, or wide shot here and there. He didn't do a lot of that, and I think that was a purposeful decision on his part because he didn't want to overextend himself too much. He didn't really want to expose his lack of directorial experience when it comes to a feature film by just trying to do anything and everything that he could possibly think of when it comes to his first film. So there are some moments where he kind of played it a little safe, but I think that worked out fine for the kind of film that The Great Muppet Caper was. You don't really need, this elaborate, insane kind of direction for this movie. You just need something that's measured and something that's, at the very least, solid. And I think Jim really did provide that to the film. And I really do feel that it was the right decision to go with somebody who had worked with the Muppets, who had worked with the same crew, and had more of an idea of what their strengths and weaknesses are, and had more patience when it comes to the puppet sequences. It's not that James Frawley did a bad job with the Muppet movie. It's just that he really wasn't at home directing a Muppet film. But Jim Henson was very much at home directing a Muppet movie. And a big reason why a lot of the film's set pieces, the musical numbers, or the sequences involving the Muppets and some kind of action work as well as they do is because of Jim Henson's direction and how well he ultimately helmed the entirety of the production. Now, The Great Muppet Caper is written by a cadre of writers. You've got Jerry Jewell, who was involved. I believe he was one of the writers who did co-write the Muppet movie. So you had Jerry Jewell, who was back on board. But then you had three other writers who were just thrown into the mix. Tom Patchett, Jay Tarses, and Jack Rose. And I definitely feel that this screenplay is a case of there being a few too many cooks in the kitchen. Because there's a lot of writers who are competing against one another for jokes, for gags, and for subplots, and they're just throwing stuff at the wall and trying to see what sticks. And it's very obvious that that is the case. And when it comes to the Muppet Show, that can work because it's a show that has multiple different opportunities for different genres of sketches, different writing styles, and so on and so forth. This is not an anthology film, so having all of this randomness is not necessarily a good thing. It just makes things come across a little more jumbled than they need to be. And I definitely feel that if there were less writers, I think this would have been a tighter and a better overall screenplay and a better film. But even then, I still think it would have had some issues because of the fact that the plot itself is just a generic caper movie. And there's really not a whole lot that you can do with that, despite the Muppets being a part of it. It's still a generic crime caper film. And unless the writing does some really heavy lifting and puts a new spin or a new twist on it, you're still left with just the same tired old crime caper movie that was very creaky and old by the time that this film came out in 1981. Now, I do feel the film starts off really strong, though. It starts off with a really fun, clever opening credits sequence with the Muppets in a hot air balloon. And Fozzie is commenting on the fact that they're in a movie, and he's talking about the opening credits. And it's honestly really clever and the kind of meta comedy that the Muppets are known for. And then the actual movie starts. And then things just kind of start to go downhill the more that it plays on. You don't have a fun framing device like the Muppet movie did with the Muppets watching the movie and then going back to them in the theater. Instead, it's just pretty much the story unfolding as is, with really not a lot of anything else that tries to punch it up, other than the occasional musical number. And when you see that Kermit, Fozzie, and Gonzo are investigative reporters for the Daily Chronicle, you immediately know that, oh, so this is not actually a sequel to the Muppet movie. We're not actually following the continuity here. We're just taking a page from the show and kind of doing an extended sketch. And that to me wasn't necessarily the best idea, especially when it still actually follows the continuity of points, because it actually has references to the Muppet movie at one point. When the Muppets go to the Happiness Hotel in England, they actually run into the Electric Mayhem band, and they mention there's like a line that clearly is trying to reference the Muppet movie. And I'm like, okay, so you'll make references and you'll definitely talk about the continuity existing, but then you'll ignore it entirely when it comes to anything else, especially when it comes to Kermit and Miss Piggy. So you have the whole stuff with Kermit and Fozzie and Gonzo, and they're working for the Daily Chronicle, and that's when you get one of the two good musical numbers from the film with Hey a Movie, and it's not It's a Movie. I screwed up and mislabeled the song when I was talking about the direction for the film. My apologies, but I think that is a lyric in the song, so it still kind of fits. But Hey a Movie is honestly a fun sequence that has a lot of physical comedy and stunts, and it honestly reminded me of like the opening of Superman 3. And if the entirety of the film had that same energy, then this would have been a lot more entertaining overall. This would have been a better movie than it is. But it doesn't have the same energy throughout. In fact, it has a lot of lulls. Honestly, the best way to describe this screenplay and this story and the film is that it goes in fits and spurts. So you'll have moments where there's a spurt of ingenuity, there's a spurt of comedy, and then it'll stop. And then you'll be stuck waiting for one of those moments again. And those moments are strong enough that it still turns out to be, at the very least, an average screenplay and an average story. But I genuinely feel there was potential to be so much more than that. Because the whole idea of Kermit, Fozzie, and Gonzo working for a newspaper, that's a fun idea. But it barely does anything with it. Because they try to get a story, they fail because they miss the whole jewel theft that went on in front of their own eyes. They get fired by their boss at the Daily Chronicle, but then Kermit convinces him to allow them to go to England to interview Lady Holiday. And that's when you get one of the spurts of comedy where the boss is like, oh, I'll agree to do that, but I'm not paying for your ticket. So then the Muppets just wind up in the cargo hold in shipping containers and then get tossed out of the airplane when they get close enough to their destination. So there are these moments of just genuinely fun Muppet chaos and moments that are actually funny and clever, but they just don't happen as often as you would like, especially for a Muppet movie. And what happens after the Muppets get to England, they need to find a place to stay, so then they hear about the Happiness Hotel because they're trying to ask somebody for a place that they can stay for no money, and that's the only option that was available. And there's a big musical number called The Happiness Hotel, and it's the second song on the film's soundtrack that is actually decent, but it comes with a catch. Yeah, I don't mind the song, and I think it's well done when it comes to the choreography and all of that, but it doesn't fit with the tone of the film because of the fact that it feels like something that would be in the South. It would be at a farm in the middle of, the country, somewhere, in not in the UK. If it doesn't feel like it would be in the middle of London, so to speak. It feels like a song, a musical number that would happen on a farm somewhere in the South or in the Midwest, because it's got this country twang to it, and it's catchy, and it's definitely got its merits, but it just doesn't feel like it belongs in a film that is taking place in England. So, even though I like the song, it still is something that, in all honesty, doesn't really fit with the movie that they're trying to make. So, it's not necessarily as much of a positive as it should be. And then after that, you get to the whole subplot with the mistaken identity thing, with Miss Piggy, who is convincing Kermit that she's Lady Holiday. And she goes along with this ruse for a good chunk of the story. And this ruse is not interesting. It's not enjoyable. And honestly, it's kind of annoying because of the fact that this is another instance of the writers just ignoring continuity when it comes to the Muppet movie. We don't need to see Kermit and Miss Piggy fall in love again. And this time around, Kermit doesn't even know that it's Miss Piggy. Like, that is just not needed at all. And there's a good chunk of the story where it's just all about that. And that's not interesting. That's not exciting. That's boring and it's uninspired. At least to me personally, because we've already been there. We've already seen this. You can throw in as many elaborate musical numbers as you want to. It doesn't change the fact that you're still doing the same thing again, but just with more razzle and dazzle. Now, there are some points during that whole subplot that do work, but it works despite the fact that this is going on. Not because of it. I mean, the stuff with John Cleese and Joan Sanderson as the wealthy British homeowners. Like, that works, but it's one of those things where they are what makes it work. The writing for those characters is what makes it work. And you could have that entire sequence without even having to do this whole thing where Kermit and Miss Piggy don't know whether or not they're meant for each other, or they're falling for one another, but they don't commit. Like, we don't need that. You can have that kind of comedy without any of that. You could maybe set something up where, they have to work together to try to get into that house because they heard about a tip or a clue about the jewelry theft, and that enables them to then get involved in some shenanigans with John Cleese and his wife. Like, you can just set it up that way. And speaking of stuff like that, the whole stuff involving Nicky Holiday and his trio of models that's working for him as his henchwomen, that was also really lame. And it was such a shame because Charles Grodin is great in this. He really is. But he's let down by the writing for his character. Nicky Holiday, despite Grodin's best efforts, is a very forgettable antagonist. And it doesn't help either that he really is not set up in a way where he is really that intriguing or that mysterious, because you automatically know that he's the one that's doing all this stuff way too early on in the story. The screenplay is just very lazy on way more occasions than it should be. for something as usually clever as the Muppets. Because why wasn't there a bunch of red herrings? Why wasn't there a bunch of people that could be suspects in this robbery? And the Muppets have to try to figure out who is actually responsible, and have fun with that. Like, why didn't we go that route? Instead, we already know who the thief is very early on, and it just ruins any of the suspense or any of the intrigue when it comes to that aspect of the plot. And what you're eventually left with is just these fun little moments here and there with the Muppets, maybe, with Miss Piggy or with Kermit or Gonzo or Fozzie, and them working together to try to stop the next jewel heist, which is going to be the baseball diamond. And you get some fun stunts with Miss Piggy on a motorcycle, which was cool. And the Muppets play keep away with the diamond because they managed to get there and get to the diamond before the thieves do. And then eventually, stuff winds up going the Muppets' way because they wind up taking out Nikki and the henchwomen, and they get arrested, and the Muppets get their story at the Chronicle, and they wind up getting thrown out of the plane again as it passes over the U.S., and then they parachute to safety, and then there's like a few other kind of meta, like fourth wall breaking moments, and that's really it for the Great Muppet Caper. Like there's an extended long musical number with Miss Piggy that honestly I think just brings the entire film and its momentum to a crashing halt. Because that's right in the middle of the whole thing where Kermit doesn't know that Miss Piggy is not Lady Holiday, and she's trying to go with this whole ruse, and you have this really long musical number called The First Time It Happens, and then you have another one which is Piggy's Fantasy, and and it's this whole thing where she's doing a big musical number in a swimming pool with all these other dancers, and I just didn't really care. I didn't really care about it. It didn't do that much for me. It was definitely something that had a budget behind it, and it had a lot of really well done dance choreography, and it definitely did a good job recreating the whole look and feel of an old musical number from like the 30s or 40s, but that doesn't mean that I particularly liked it that much, because I just felt like it was just overlong and really didn't add that much to the plot. It was just something that was there. It was on the screen. It was, nice to look at, had some sparkle, had some glitz, but didn't really feel like it had much else beyond that. And it's just one of those screenplays where I feel that it's just okay at best, because of the fact that the entirety of the plot for the most part is just a very generic caper film with the Muppets thrown in. There's occasionally some fun lines of dialogue from the Muppets or from some of the other characters. There's occasionally some good sight gags or some good clever bits of comedy, but there's a lot of times where it just doesn't hit the mark. And then it doesn't do enough to put a spin on the caper concept or satirize it or parody it to make it into something that's good in that regard. And then the villain is just very weak, despite the best efforts of the actor who's playing him. So, yeah, I definitely feel that this is a very mediocre screenplay. Now, the cast is good. I think the human actors do a good job, actually do a pretty great job, despite the very mediocre script. You know, Diana Rigg, I thought she was wonderful. She was lovely as Lady Holiday. Uh, Charles Grodin was a effective enough villain, despite him being forgettable because of the fact that the script barely even bothered to give him much of an arc or much of a character to begin with. Uh, Other than randomly throwing in a bit where he's falling for Miss Piggy, which I'm like, great, we're doing that again, but this time it's gonna be with the bad guy. But I mean, I can't blame Charles Grodin. He's still very game here. Michael Robbins as the security guard at the Mallory Gallery. He had some fun bits, especially the whole bit where he was talking. I don't like pepperoni. I think just the whole idea of somebody just being like, I don't like pepperoni, and that's the whole thing they're focusing on when it comes to somebody offering them a free pizza, is kind of funny. And I think the dry line delivery by Robbins definitely did sell it. Uh, and I think then you have like the three supermodels, the henchwomen, Erica Creer, Kate Howard, and Della Finch. They were just very meh too. Beautiful, but not much in terms of a personality. The cameos were fun. John Cleese stole every scene that he was in, almost to the point where maybe he should have been the villain, or maybe he should have been involved in the film more than he was. Um, Peter Ustinov had a fun little cameo that also wound up having another cameo with Oscar the Grouch that was rather enjoyable. Jack Warden did a good job playing the angry boss of the Chronicle. Peter Falk, I like him a lot, but what was this role? It looked like something that would have been done in Central Park, not in the UK. He just acted like he always does in anything. And it was nice to see him, but it just felt like it was another scene that was just kind of thrown in there. It was almost one of those things where the writers, once again, were like, oh, let's just throw this in there and see if it works. So, yeah, the cameos were fine, but nowhere near on the level of the Muppet movie. Definitely a letdown in that regard, considering all the big names they were able to get for that film. And, you know, the Muppet performers are once again marvelous. I mean, Jim Henson is Kermit and Ralph and Dr. Teeth and all the other characters he plays. Frank Oz is Miss Piggy and Fozzie Bear and Animal. Dave Goelz is Gonzo. Jerry Nelson is Floyd and Crazy Harry and Pops. And Richard Hunt is Scooter and Sweetums and Janice. And Steve Whitmire is Rizzo and... you know, Carol Spinney, who is back again, but as Oscar. You know, yeah, it's definitely got some good Muppet work in it. I mean, that's to be expected. It's a Muppet movie. It's a great Muppet caper. So the Muppet stuff is definitely, for the most part, very solid and if not spectacular at points. And really, the big reason why the film is at all enjoyable or somewhat entertaining for me, or something that I at the very least like, is because of the Muppets and the Muppet performers, because they do as much heavy lifting as they possibly can to lift this very mediocre story and plot to higher heights. But at the end of the day, they're only you know, as strong as they are, and you know, they can only lift so much. Now, the film also features some serviceable cinematography by Oswald Morris, but I wouldn't consider it to be on the same level the cinematography of the Muppet movie. It's definitely kind of drab at points. The editing by Ralph Kemplin I felt was fine, but I definitely felt there were some moments where there were some scenes that could have been trimmed down, could have been cut a little tighter. The music by Joe Raposo, It's not bad. I mean, Joe Raposo has experience with the Muppets, with Sesame Street, and I do think that there are some good songs here. Hey, a Movie and Happiness Hotel. But there's a lot of songs here that are either just filler or songs that I just don't really like that much. And I would never really listen to again. And having, the combination of Muppets and all the chaos that they bring and the comedy and the music is a big part of the appeal of the Muppets and a big part of the appeal of a Muppet movie. And the music here is just, honestly, I think it's below average. I don't even think it's average, because Hey, a Movie and Happiness Hotel are the only songs that I liked, and the rest of the songs I didn't care for or I thought really weren't that good. And then the instrumental stuff really wasn't much of anything either. So that was definitely one of the bigger letdowns for the film, because the Muppet movie soundtrack is iconic and something that, honestly, for the most part, with the majority of the tracks, except for maybe one, I could listen to again and again and again and never get tired of it. This is a soundtrack that I would listen to it like once and then get some fun out of it that one time, but never really have a desire to listen to any of the songs or the entirety of the soundtrack again. So yeah, for me personally, The Great Muppet Caper, it's just not so great. I've seen better Muppet movies, but I've also seen worse, I have to admit. I think this is still, despite its flaws, one of the better Muppet films. But I know that the Muppets have potential and can actually reach greater heights than this. And they did previously, and they would actually go on to do so after this film. So it's one of those films that I'm conflicted on, because I see the potential with the premise, with the idea, and it just didn't turn out as well as it could have. And I think that honestly makes it one of the more disappointing Muppet movies for me personally, because I think that there is a genuine classic Muppet movie within the structure, or within the framework of this film, but it just never really comes to life in the end. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of The Great Muppet Caper, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.